So this week we're going to focus on two things: art as activism, and we're going to focus on found objects as a material to make art with. If you don't recognize this, this is outside in Everett. This is downtown on Colby at Zamarama Gallery. They're boarding up all of the different businesses. But in this theme of what we're doing here is talking about how does art communicate specifically, and how do we do that when we're in the middle of a social phenomenon, which we all are right now. So we're going to focus on that particular piece, like how do artists communicate with each other? How are artists activists? And how do we use materials strategically to get our message across? So I want you to get your sketchbooks out. You also want something to write with. So pause this video if you don't have that. When you're ready, get out a clean page and head at Found Object Sculpture. And as we go through these slides, I want you to take notes. Okay, make sure that you take notes on new vocabulary. Make sure you head it as vocabulary. When you send me photographs of your notes, I want to see that it is organized and useful, right? Don't just scribble it all down into a big blob, because that's not a useful way to use your notes, okay? And so we're going to talk about vocabulary and new concepts. I'm going to introduce you to an artist, Ai Weiwei, and some of his work using found objects and how he uses it as in his activism. And then you're going to have a couple assignments in your sketchbook to just kind of prepare yourself for our next assignment. The three pieces of vocabulary and concepts that I want you to be considering. So please make sure that they're headed as new vocabulary for the unit. Found object art. It's basically the practice of making art out of objects that already exist. Okay, I'll say that again, that it's making art out of objects that already exist, whether it's a cup, a chair, a hammer, garbage. A lot of times found object artists will use trash or post-consumer items because there is a lot of ways that we can create communication about social responsibility using waste. Activism, if you don't know what that means, it's just actively working for social change, something you care about, and you're actively working to make a difference. And then the word iconic. So the word iconic is often used to describe something or someone that's symbolic of something else, like a bigger idea. So the example is bell bottoms are iconic to 1960s fashion. So the idea that something is iconic means that when someone sees it, it brings up a bigger idea. So our featured artist is going to be Ai Weiwei, and he is a Chinese artist. He's an activist. He's an architect, and he really works with found objects to communicate very big ideas. He is born in China and is currently living in Germany. He does his work mostly to communicate with a larger audience about injustice. And so lots of his work focuses on the cultural and social climate in China. He was actually arrested and put on house arrest in China, was put under surveillance, wasn't allowed to leave the country, and his work wasn't allowed to leave the country until eventually that has changed, and he's since moved to Germany. So some key points about him, that his artwork uses iconic found objects to build off of that inherent relationship people have with common objects, such as a stool. So to go a little deeper into that, those iconic objects that he uses, they already have meaning. So when he chooses them strategically and specifically for that meaning. And then he modifies those objects or manipulates them to create a deeper, more, in some ways, shocking meaning. right? So, for example, one of the pieces that is not featured in this presentation, but some of his work was to take ancient vessels and destroy them and take photographs of them as they're being destroyed. So taking that ancient vessel, it already has meaning. It's a cultural symbol, right? It's a symbol of human evolution. It's a symbol of history, and it's a symbol of culture. And by destroying it and then taking photographs of that, the destruction, he's going and creating a really powerful message that makes people upset, right? And what he's trying to show is that the modernization of China is leaving and basically destroying the cultural heritage. So if you see like how that is, you choose the object with intention, and what you do to it creates a new meaning. The second key point is that he uses multiples of his common objects to intensify and manipulate the viewer's relationship. So instead of using just one stool, using lots of stools, right? And then building off of that inherent meaning and relationship that the people have with those objects to very specifically create more complex ideas. And in his case, he wants to create commentaries about society, things that he sees that are not acceptable. And he wants to create, that's part of his activism, is to create these messages and meaning behind his work using these common iconic objects. So here's one of his pieces, Grapes. I was talking about stools. This piece is using specifically a type of stool that's common, three-legged stool. It is commonly found in Chinese homes. As he says, that these stools are sometimes handed down from family member to family member to generation. And they have a very specific style, and they're generally made by craftsmen. These pieces, he's collecting these to show that these wooden stools are being cast out, and the modernization of China is taking these relics of culture and turning them into trash, because now these stools are being recreated in plastic and mass produced. So it's the idea of taking an object that is culturally identifiable, it's iconic, right? So this stool is iconic of a traditional Chinese home, and manipulating it, so taking them out of their environment, in this case, securing them all together to build a new form. And then that form has meaning by the mass amount of them. It creates more drama, and then again, it becomes a social commentary on the modernization of China, and how one of the consequences of that is leaving behind these cultural artifacts. Here's another example. So if you're reading along with me, I just want to highlight this piece. So this body of work serves as a metaphor about China's socialist history, which requires the individual to set aside his or her personal interests in favor of those of the larger group or the state. So it's an exploration of cultural values communicated through, again, these same traditional stools, these iconic items. This piece is a pretty emotional piece, and there is a video that follows it talking about his work. And it may touch on this piece, but it may not, actually, because I looked at a few to try to find the video I wanted to show you guys. This piece is a very emotional and very controversial work of art. And so this is called an installation, when your artwork fills a space. And so this installation, it's a sculpture, but it's also a sculpture that's categorized as an installation because it fills an entire space and the viewer interacts with its physical space, is titled Straight, and it's made of rebar. And every piece of rebar that you see in this picture has been layered up to create what looks like the image of like a seismograph. And it's showing the reality of an earthquake that happened in China. So, because of corruption in the government and in some parts of Chinese society, there has been a lack of oversight in the quality control of buildings, and many buildings are left far below a safe health code. And the consequence of that is there is an earthquake, and the earthquake collapsed a school building, killing many children. And so he went to that site and he collected the rebar, the pieces of metal from that site, bent them and cut them into the form to build this sculpture. Part of this installation also is it's a voice audio of different family members who have sent in recordings of their children's names, and it plays on a loop. So as you're walking around looking at this piece, which is the remnants of a collapsed school building which buried many children alive, you're hearing their parents and friends and siblings saying their names out loud on a recording, the names of the deceased children. So this is another example of how found object artwork brings meaning with it. Just the object itself has meaning. So a rebar represents a structure or a building. It's a everyday construction material. But taking the rebar from a disaster site that represents, in his mind, an injustice, and I would assume all of ours, but in the country of China, it was considered a very bad thing to do for him to expose this. And he got into a lot of trouble. But the idea that exposing injustice through art is activism, and that art in itself can be activism.
Antique wooden stools from the Qing dynasty repurposed into a sculpture called Grapes, a video documenting changes along a major street in Beijing, an ancient vase creatively altered or debased, you decide, with a modern-day logo. Now on display at the Smithsonian's Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C., in an exhibition called According to What, these are the works by the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei, a prankster who can make a tea house literally out of tea leaves, and represents the real surveillance camera that watches him at his home in China as a marble sculpture. He's also a visionary who helped design the Bird's Nest Stadium for the Beijing Olympics, and whose use of social media is shifting the boundaries of art and activism. And a dissident, progressive for human rights, who took a picture and tweeted it even as he was being arrested in 2009. And then spent 81 days in prison, was beaten, and made the X-ray image of the damage he suffered into an artwork, Brain Inflation.
For me, living in today's world, living in China, it's very hard just do a work which not reflects or suggest with other possibility and meanings. All the works I do which are connected or reflects either to the art history or to the political situation. Only in that context my work can have some meaning.
Ai lives and works in Beijing and is not allowed by the government to travel outside China. He spoke recently to a camera crew hired by the NewsHour to pose our questions.
I cannot separate myself from once as artist or to as was a so-called activist. Only because I don't know what I will be next.
Born in 1957, Ai is the son of a renowned poet. The father and his family, including the young Weiwei, were sent to be re-educated in a rural village for 2 years during the Cultural Revolution. Ai Weiwei came of age as part of a generation of young Chinese artists breaking out of past strictures. Beginning in 1981, he lived in the U.S. for 12 years. His New York photographs, many of which are in the Hirshhorn exhibition, chronicle his bohemian life with other artists and writers, both Chinese and American.
For me, Ai Weiwei has been one of the most important artists that has emerged from this new wave of Chinese art from the 90s and the 2000s.
Kerry Brower is chief curator at the Hirshhorn.
There are multiple layers in Ai Weiwei's work. You can read certain pieces very simply as what they are, but you can also dig deeper. You can see the history of China reflected in much of the work. You can see conflicts with Western culture and Eastern culture, and you can see critiques sometimes of the Chinese government or of other governments as well, power in general.
Often you can see a provocation, as in one of Ai's most famous works, dropping a Han Dynasty urn. 3 photographs showing exactly that, the destruction of a 2,000-year-old cultural relic.
One of the things I think he's saying is sometimes it's necessary to destroy the old before you can move forward with the new. And also, by destroying something that's important, it suddenly makes you have to think about the value of things. What are they worth? Who says they're valuable?
Ai returned to China in 1993 and became part of the country's cultural elite, eventually tapped by the government to collaborate with a Swiss architectural firm to design the 2008 Olympic Stadium. Photos are on the floors and walls of the exhibition. But he grew critical of the Communist Party's attempt to control the event. His biggest confrontation with the authorities soon followed, after the earthquake in Sichuan province, when more than 5,000 children were killed in poorly constructed schools that collapsed, leading to accusations of official corruption and a cover-up. I photographed the destruction and started an online campaign to collect the names, ages, and other data for each victim. That became a wall-sized display and an audio recording called Remembrance. He also transformed tragedy into art, collecting some 38 tons of twisted steel rebar from the destruction, straightening it and arranging it as a large rolling sculpture titled Straight. And picking up one particularly poignant image from the rubble, he created a long serpentine work constructed of children's backpacks. The documentary film Ai Weiwei, Never Sorry captures some of his attempts to gain information on what had happened. Filmmaker Alison Klayman spent 3 years watching Ai Weiwei up close in his work as artist and activist.
He is an artist first and foremost, as the sort of overriding umbrella for all of his work. But to him, what is the definition of an artist? It's someone who is interested in communication, who's interested in engagement, who has to be talking about things that are relevant to the world around him or her.
Indeed, communication and new technology, the internet and social media, became a passion for Ai. Beginning in 2006 and lasting 3 years, he wrote a blog about art, life, and politics before it was shut down by the government. He now spends hours a day online and remains very active on Twitter, though it's blocked within China.
Internet is such a beautiful miracle for the society like China, because we are still living under very restricted dictatorship. We are still living on very restricted control on freedom of expression, and the internet probably is the only vehicle for people to even sense there's another person who shares the same idea or who can offer different information about what is happening. And that is the foundation for civil society.
The very serious side and still the playful side. work of some 3,200 river crabs made of porcelain. Why? Well, the Chinese term for river crab sounds like the word for harmonious. That, in turn, has become ironic internet slang in China referring to official censorship. Ai Weiwei continues to make museum-ready objects, such as cube light, a huge chandelier that refers to the traditions of both Chinese lanterns and Western minimalist art. He also continues to speak his mind.
I often tell young people because they always say, Mr. I feel so bad because I don't think we can change a society like this. So I often reply to them, I said, we are part of the society. If we can change ourselves, if we can act, so that means part of the society are changed. If more people can do so, then we can change the society.
After his release from prison in 2011, I was charged with tax evasion and hit with a multi-million-dollar fine, which his backers see as further punishment for his activism. In the meantime, the Chinese government continues to hold his passport, which made it impossible for Ai Weiwei to attend the opening of the exhibition of his own work in Washington.
So, in reflection of his work, I'd like to kind of steer us towards our current situation that we're doing. Like, our lives have all changed very, very dramatically. And there's these times where I don't even notice it. Like, I'm just doing whatever, and I just am still thinking about the same things I'm always thinking about. Like, oh, I'm going to watch this show tonight. Oh, ooh, I should watch that movie. Or, ooh, that sounds like something really good to eat. But then there are these moments where I realize how much my life has changed in the last month. One of the biggest ones, obviously, is that I don't get to see you guys. And I do my job like this, where I talk to a computer or I videotape myself making something. And it's really, really different. There's pluses and minuses that came out of this. Obviously, it is a tragedy. Everything about this is a tragedy, but it doesn't mean that there aren't these small little things that are positive changes. And for one, I could say that in my house, a positive change is that my children are cooking like a lot. Which is pretty cool, you know? So the fact that we don't have things to do causes us to be inventive. So what I want you to do is try to create a mind map. Well, not try, do. Create a mind map. In the center of your mind map is just the pandemic, right? The COVID-19 pandemic. That's right at the center. And then having it branch out from there, what are some of the biggest impacts that this has had on our society? So, for example, I listed the schools are closed, businesses are closed. It's impacting our healthcare. It's impacting families, mental health, death and illness. And it's creating a culture of fear, right? And a culture of panic. As you branch out to that first level, right? Think of as many ways. There are plenty more. I just obviously don't want to make any more little boxes. So you can just make this as big and as expansive as you possibly can and try to make it look great. Like, use different colors and use different ways of communicating. It doesn't have to be sterile and boring because you're in an art class, right? Sorta. You're in an art course. So for example, the culture of fear and panic. Toilet paper. I don't know if that's a big deal at y'all's houses, but toilet paper, like, I have to hunt it down when it's time for toilet paper, and it's all rationed out so people can't take so much of it, but they still are. Like, it's not even a life-saving item. You can't die from lack of toilet paper, you know? Like, but for some reason, that is the way a lot of people's fear is manifesting, is hoarding toilet paper. So I challenge you, what are some other ways that the culture of fear and panic has changed the way we live? As far as death and illness, there are lots of things. And I hope that everyone in your lives are healthy and safe. But regardless if you've experienced grief or if you have not, you know that that has changed. So the way we're experiencing illness is changed with There's a ton more fear, the testing. If someone goes to the hospital, you can't visit them, that there are no public funerals. Like there's a lot of things that have happened that have changed the way we live. Mental health. One thing that is really upsetting is the increase in domestic violence. Because of the stress, people are falling apart. Addicts that were in recovery are now relapsing, and addicts that were not in recovery are now going deeper and deeper into their addictions, causing less and less healthy environments for the people they live with. The way that things are impacting our healthcare system is it's flooded with people who are ill. So we're running out of equipment. Businesses are closed, and so there's a rise in unemployment. Our schools are closed, and our poor seniors don't get to go through their rites of passage. They're losing so many of their lifelong goals of finishing their senior year and what that's going to look like. It's all going to look different. So go way beyond what I did, and I'd like to see you come up with a minimum of the what's in orange. So that's kind of our first layer of affect, and so a minimum of 8, like what I have. So you can use mine and then come up with one more on your own. But if you can do more than 8, do more. And then of the ones you have, I want you to come up with 3 little breakouts that break out of that, which would be the blue, right? How it breaks out. And then if you can go even farther and break those out, I would love to see what that looks like and how your brain works. You'll be submitting pictures of these to me on Google Classroom. So please make sure that you make it legible, make sure it's labeled as the impact mind map, and make sure that it's expansive. So I want you to, once you finish reflecting on the impact mind map, I guess generating ideas and kind of contextualizing this state we're in, I want you to reflect on these 2 questions. The first one, what is the power of an everyday object in communicating through art? So I want you to pause this video, and I want you to take a moment and reflect on this in your sketchbook. Okay? The second question I want you to reflect on, the second prompt, is I want you to list objects that have become iconic in everyday life during the coronavirus pandemic. So remember, iconic are objects that in 20 years, when you see that object, you'll be like, I remember back when we were in quarantine, my sophomore year of high school, right? So things like medical masks, that forever will be something that I will think of in this time. Toilet paper, right? So what are the other odd objects that have become iconic during this time? Pause the video and complete the reflection. All right, so your creative challenge. I want you to create a found object sculpture that clearly communicates your experience of life during a pandemic. This can be from any angle or any perspective, as long as it documents your experience through art. Okay? So you're using found objects. Your project must use found objects, and it must communicate a truth about your experience. It doesn't mean you were there. It doesn't mean you are sick or someone you know is sick. Even if it's just an artwork about toilet paper, right? Because it's very unusual in the United States that we would have a shortage of toilet paper or a shortage of food. There's a lot of people who, like folks who depend on WIC for their food. You know, they get to the grocery stores and there's nothing left, and WIC checks will only buy certain things. So there's a lot of ways that we can look at this and see all these individual experiences. And what are some of the things that are yours? Okay. And I want you to create a found object sculpture that it can be funny, it can be sad, it can be fearful, it can be factual, but somehow create a found object sculpture inspired by the work that you saw of I's work, and use it to communicate your experience. Okay. I want to challenge you to take those projects out into the world, place them places, or take photographs of them and put them on social media. Whatever it is that you do, because thinking about it as a communication device, I would love to hear or see about ways that you're trying to communicate with others, not just yourself, through this process. For those of you who are just feisty peeps and or you're not inspired by this topic, I want to first say stick with it and do your best. I want to see you try to communicate about your own experience through this time and place we're in right now. But if you don't feel connected to this topic, substitute the phrase during a pandemic in the creative challenge with something that matters to you, right? Communicate that to me through your planning so I know what you're trying to communicate. But it needs to fit into that sentence. Create a found object sculpture that clearly communicates your experience of life blank, right? What is something about your life that you would want to communicate if it's not going to be about this pandemic? So I have some suggestions for you. Collect 10 to 100 objects and arrange them in an interesting way. So inspired by the stools in grapes, right? That was, I think, 26 stools that were all fastened together. What a cool idea, right? Walk down the alleys in Everett if your parents allow you to. I love walking down the alleys. There's so many free piles. There's a free pile outside my house in Everett. So just walking through the alleys and collecting things and reflecting on what you see. If you can get multiples to create more drama, that's a really cool idea. What if you collected 100 pop can tabs? What could you do with those, right? There's all sorts of small items and large items that you can collect multiples of. So challenge yourself to try to find multiples or consider using one object as a collection of objects. I challenge you to create or place your sculpture in a public place to communicate with others who are going through similar experiences. I'll show you some examples of artists who are doing that. Create an uplifting message for people who feel scared, suffering, or bored. I'm sure there are people out there who are bored, right? What can you do to just communicate something to those people to give them a small amount of satisfaction as they're watching the 7th hour of Netflix? Use the objects to create a public service announcement encouraging safe social distancing, right? So think about the things people are trying to practice every day. Can you create something that's going to remind them or support them as they're doing that? I'm finding social distancing to be kind of hard. Like some people don't do it. And I'm trying to be polite. And I'm also at the same time trying to be cautious. I have elderly people in my life. I don't want to, get them sick or anything. And so like, there's definitely weird interactions where people get too close to me and I'm like, back up. Right. So creating some type of a public service announcement that encourages people to keep a safe distance or like create a piece of clothing that enforces it. Like it has like pokers on it, 6 foot long pokers. There are so many different ideas, but those are a couple suggestions. So some examples that I was able to find are altering an established icon, right? So something that already is iconic to a city. So for example, if you were to walk down Colby, you'll find a lot of sculptures, right? So we have a public art process, and if you were to choose one of those sculptures and do something that is respectful, right, and that is only temporary, because we don't want to mess with someone's artwork in a way that's not kind, respectful, or just kind of respectful. we don't want to, I don't support that. But what I do support is something temporary, like this example, putting a mask on something that represents their city, something that they see every day. This is actually a sculpture about war. But now, by putting the mask on it, by using a found object, they were able to communicate a war, the current war that we're in, which is against a virus. Recreate something iconic, right? So I said about building clothing or something, like this is another idea. Recreate something iconic to these times, like a mask, and manipulate it, even if it's just to be funny or it's just to make a commentary on fear. Like there's a lot of funny memes going around about what people put over their faces. Or use iconic found objects to create social commentary about something that you find disturbing or wrong, like hoarding toilet paper. This person is actually just sticking toilet paper holders and toilet paper rolls in various places. I really like this one. Redefine a common practice, right? We used to go get our nails done. Well, we don't now. And the very reason is because we're trying to stop the spread of this virus, and we spread it on our hands. So there's so many layers to this clever piece of artwork here of just one hand has the actual COVID reproductions of the COVID virus itself, and the other hand has the healthcare workers. And on the thumbs, it says, stop the spread of COVID-19. Decorating a found object to make meaning. So these masks, these are all healthcare professionals wearing masks in these photographs, but what they've done is they've actually painted viruses onto the masks, what the mask is filtering out. So it's what you don't see. So they've creatively tried to recreate what it is that you don't see on that outside end of a mask or a face covering. And then lastly, again, there's lots of artists that are doing really cool things to try to support each other. Put your artwork somewhere where people can see it, whether that's social media or if it is just putting it in your yard or putting it, going on a walk and hiding it in a bush somewhere. Take a picture of it. Whatever you do with it, show me. If it's on social media, take a screenshot and show me. I won't stalk you, I promise. I want to see what you're doing, because this type of artwork, you're communicating with a larger audience. And so just doing it for yourself is important and it feels good. But if you can take that next step, that level 4 step to get out there and share it with someone else, I really want to know about it. All right. So what you need to do, submit all your prep work first. Okay, so on Canvas, you can turn in your vocabulary, the notes about our featured artist, and your mind map. Turn all of those things in with photographs that are clear. I can understand what they are. I can read the words. So make sure that they're not crummy photographs, and make sure you take care to do a nice job on taking notes. And then on a new page, document it as found object planning. What I need to know is, what are you going to communicate? Right? So you can't say, I want to communicate life during a pandemic, because that's too general, right? But what about it? I want to communicate how fear and panic has manifested in a lack of toilet paper, right? So that would be an appropriate response. Then describe why. I want to use this object because it communicates how people only look out for themselves when they become afraid, and they don't care about anyone else, including elderly women who need to have toilet paper, and don't make it to the grocery stores as often, don't have giant trucks to take home huge things of toilet paper, or who live alone and are used to just buying a 4 or 6 pack at a time, right? Why? Why are you using that object to communicate your message? So create 3 or more composition sketches. And that means if I'm using toilet paper, I want to come up with 3 different ways I can use toilet paper to communicate my message, right? So I'm not doing 3 different messages, 3 different ways I could arrange it, okay? And then you're going to photograph all of this as you're planning and submit that to me on Canvas. I am pretty excited to see what you guys come up with. Have fun with this, be creative. And found object is such a cool way to communicate with art, because it doesn't actually require you to make something to make an extraordinary work of art, right? You're not making it from scratch. You're taking something that already has meaning and you're building layers on top of it in the ways that you alter it. So if you think about found object artwork, it's kind of like a meme, right? In a meme, everything already exists in the culture. But what the person who creates the meme does is they manipulate that meaning to create a new meaning. And then they communicate that widely to others, right? So have fun. If you want to look at anything else, I've included a few resources here. Here's the official website of our featured artists. Here's an article about his piece, the particular piece with the school children who died in the earthquake. And then there's another article just about lots of artists responding to the coronavirus through their work. And you'll find some interesting things, a lot more 2D artists, graffiti artists, stuff like that. So that's just a really short article. Even just click on it to see the pictures. So this should be posted. This whole presentation will be posted, and feel free to go through it at your own pace. And I miss ya. Be good. Ask me questions. Send me new resources if you see new stuff.